After 2 years in school, it's time for these juniors to step up and break out.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. You are joining us on a live edition Tuesday morning for me, afternoon for most people listening to the show, as we are talking junior breakout candidates in college basketball. I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Remind you that you can check out this show ad-free on Amazon Music. And of course, we got to give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you who are hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. I know that's where we saw the suggestion to do junior and senior breakout candidates as opposed to just talking about sophomore breakout candidates. So excited to have an opportunity to do that today. Isaac, we're going to be talking about players in the SEC. We're going to be talking about players in the ACC and players in the Big East. And later this week, we'll talk Big 10, Big 12, and mid-major breakout candidates who are in the junior class. And part of the stipulation, we did this for sophomores last week, is trying to pick players who've averaged less than 10 points per game. And I say trying because Isaac really struggled with this and often picked players who were a little over 10 points per game. That's okay. We let him have one of them in today's show because he is a pretty obvious breakout candidate, even if he's already been in double figures. So that's what we're going to do on today's show. Before we get into that, though, briefly, we have to mention the really incredibly unfortunate passing of Gregg Glenn III from Tulane basketball, a 22-year-old player who was excellent for Tulane last year. Just a really tragic story. We haven't heard a whole lot of details. We know that he passed away in Florida on Sunday. We know Tulane disclosed it on Monday and described it as a tragic accident. Again, without a ton of additional information, we may get that, we may not get that, but either way, anytime somebody at that age passes away from something like this, it's horrific and sad, and we feel for the Tulane family. We feel, of course, for the Glenn family. He was a transfer from Michigan, so we feel for the Wolverines family as well. Just a horrible thing that unfortunately happens, a couple times a year. We see something like this in college athletics, and it's heartbreaking every single time. So really, thoughts and prayers are out there with the Glenn family as they go through this horrific tragedy.
Yeah, man, Andy, no words, nothing really other to add than my thoughts and prayers are joining in with everyone else, man. It's never easy when this happens. It's never easy to have to report it and talk about it. But I think it's important that we do and that we honor these young men and women when it happens.
And as you said, it's never easy to transition out of talking about it either. But unfortunately, we have to figure out a way to be able to do that. So, Isaac, I'm going to throw it to you to start here, picking your junior breakout candidate in the SEC. We're each going to pick one, by the way, for each conference. So we're going to have 6 total players to talk about. Isaac, why don't you kick us off with your SEC breakout candidate?
That's right. SEC, ACC, and Big East today going to be a lot of fun. Make sure you're all tuned in on Friday when we do the back half. That's going to be great. Andy, look, if we're being honest, we saw this player starting to break out late last year, even on a team with so many other high-level players, so many, in fact, that they wound up winning the national championship. I'm starting to try to make you think maybe that I'm talking about Alex Condon, but I'm not. I'm talking about Tommy Haugh. And honestly, I could have gone with Alex Condon, because I think both of these guys are going to have massive.
And because you're a cheater.
And because I'm a cheater, because Alex Condon was a little bit over 10 points a game last year. Fine. Look, Tommy Haugh last year jumped from 3.9 points to 9.8 points a game. Just all sorts of numbers climbing up. In his freshman year, had just 3 double-digit games, but had 18 double-digit games last year, Andy, including 13 of Florida's last 18 games. He has touched 20 points twice, and one of those being in the Elite Eight, Andy, against Texas Tech. And so I think that is when maybe a lot of the nation really started to to realize about Tommy Haugh. And I guess in saying that, I should shout out our guy Leaf Tulane, who's been in on Tommy Haugh for a long time. But Andy, part of this too is that Walter Clayton's out the door, Elijah Martin's out the door, Will Richards out the door, Denzel Aberdeen's out the door. And so the whole front court is intact. I know obviously Xavion Lee's going to come in and take up a lot of usage. Boogie Fland, hopefully healthy sooner rather than later. We talked about that on yesterday's show, is going to take up a lot of usage. But man, I think Tommy Haugh is going to have a massive year. Those points from the backcourt have to go somewhere. And I think he could eat a lot of them. Andy, let me give you a couple quick analytics numbers, and then we'll let you respond to this. Last year, Tommy Haugh, even, not being all that wildly critically important to this team, was second in the nation, Andy, in offensive rating at 138.1. That is bonkers. I don't even I realized how high level that was until I started looking at this. He was first in the SEC in offensive rating. He was second in the SEC in win shares per 40 minutes, and he was sixth in the SEC in offensive win shares. Crazy stuff from Tommy Haugh. All of that to me suggests a big jump this year.
What I'm really interested in is how Florida handles this front court. I mean, they have, obviously last year they had that 3-guard lineup, and you knew all three of those guys were going to start every single night with Clayton, Martin, and Richard. And now with those three players being effectively replaced by two players in Fland and Lee, and the entire front court coming back, it feels like we might be seeing a three-big lineup of sorts. And most are projecting that to have Haugh start alongside Condon and Chinyalu in Florida's front court with Lee and Fland, the other two. I'm interested in that. Does that mean Haugh's playing more of the three? Does that mean that he's spacing the floor more? Or does Condon play more at the three? Like, how do they, he's obviously a great rebounder. Condon is, so I think you want him around the rim, but it'll be interesting to see what exactly they do and how that alters Haugh's role. But yeah, he's arguably the most obvious candidate on this list if we're using that 10 point per game kind of threshold, because he was right up to it last year. He was in the last half of the year, like you said, he kind of already did it. We already saw that breakout from him. And there's nobody in the country who watched college basketball who isn't expecting Tommy Haugh to be an incredibly talented player this upcoming season. So I think this is a great pick. I think it's an obvious pick, but I think he's going to be tremendous for Todd Golden and the Gators next year.
Man, it's going to be good. Andy, what about you? Who's your SEC choice?
I struggled with the SEC. This is one of the toughest conferences, in part because there was a few guys that I really liked that were just over that 10 point per game threshold, like Alex Condon, like DJ Wagner, like Aiden Holloway. And then there was a few guys where I'm just not quite sure what their role is going to be. Like, for example, in Kentucky, I like both Brandon Garrison and Mo Diabate, but only one of those guys is going to start, and I'm not sure who exactly it's going to be or who's going to have that big offensive breakout because that team is just so deep. So I ended up going with the transfer joining the Georgia Bulldogs, and that would be Jordan Ross out of St. Mary's. Last year for the Gales, Jordan Ross averaged about 8 points, 3 boards, and 2.5 assists. He wasn't particularly efficient, only 42% on his 2-pointers, only 29% from 3. But we know the scouting report on him is that he's a better 3-point shooter than we saw last year. St. Mary's obviously plays that really slow offense. He's going to be in not a like lightning fast offense at Georgia, but a more faster paced offense. And the Bulldogs lost, so much of their talent from last year. They lose Asa Newell to the NBA. They lose Silas Demery to UConn. They lose LeFew. They lose Tyron Lawrence. RJ Godfrey transfers to Clemson. Like, they're needing to replace a lot in that backcourt. They keep Blue Kane and they bring in some other transfers, but Ross is going to play a big role for this team. And I think that you're going to see him have the ball in his hands a lot. And I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being kind of an under the radar, like, oh, hey, that's a guy who averaged 12, 13, 15 points in the SEC. That is tough to do. And I wouldn't be surprised if Ross is in that conversation if that efficiency ticks up.
Yeah, Andy, it's a good point, because when we have these breakout conversations, it's not just about who the player is. It's about context and opportunity. Mm-hmm. And at Georgia, there's a massive opportunity. You think about Silas Demery being gone up to UConn. You think about Asa Newell out the door to the NBA. And so, kind of opposite of what we said about Florida with those guys coming in, man, massive opportunity for Ross to take up a big scoring load at Georgia. So, Andy, I love our picks there. Folks, as always, in these kind of shows, we'd love to hear from you. What are your SEC junior breakout candidates? Let us know. Again, got to be under 10 points or you're a cheater like me. So, you can't have your Aiden Holloways or your DJ Wagners. fine, whatever. Okay, Andy, let's move from the SEC to the ACC. A pair of transfers make up our ACC junior breakout candidates, including potentially the next great big man at North Carolina. We'll talk about that in just a second. Right after I tell you about 5-Hour Energy. Y'all, it's time to fuel up and turn it up with 5-Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or out there making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. And let's be honest, some days on the golf course or off it, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. Look, personally, I'm honestly not that much of a golfer, but man, I get out there and play some mean mini golf, and I've hit some crazy shots. But for me, it's really all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. The great ginger lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse go-to without having to chase down the beverage cart. So if you go to 5hourenergy.com today, that's number 5hourenergy.com, you can use our promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions, and it's not good on subscription orders. So whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5-Hour Energy shots today. Andy, we changed our attention from the SEC now over to the ACC, and I think your pick might be from a recent addition to the Atlantic Coast Conference, which now has some West Coast Conference schools in it as well. Not from the West Coast Conference, but teams on the West Coast. Goodness, I just got us into a weird thing there.
Kyle Smith went from effectively being a WCC to an ACC coach, so I guess we can say there's still some WCC to ACC movement, but I'm not going with Stanford. Actually, I'm going with a player going to Cal, and that would be Day Ames is my pick here for the ACC breakout candidate. This was another conference that I kind of struggled with. There was a few players that I really liked, but I didn't want to double up on North Carolina guys, so I didn't pick the other North Carolina candidate that I thought made some sense here. I wanted to go with Ames because, again, he was pretty close. It's actually pretty similar to Ross in picking a player who was already kind of close to 10 points per game and did it at a school that played at a very slow pace where they didn't get as many possessions. They didn't get as many opportunities to shoot the rock. Ross obviously kind of filled that from St. Mary's. Ames comes over from Virginia, where he averaged just under 9 points per game last year, as well as 2 assists, played over 25 minutes per game for the Cavs last year. So a guy that obviously has already been close to being that double-digit scorer and now goes to a system that's, not super fast tempo wise. I think Madsen and Cal was like 160th or so. So, a little better than the halfway point in the country in terms of tempo, whereas Virginia obviously much closer to the bottom. Ames, the guy who's now
fourth from the bottom last year.
Yes, that sounds about right. Ames, a guy who this is his third school, his third stop. He was at Kansas State as a freshman, where he averaged about 5 points and 2 assists for the Wildcats, and then again last year about 9 points for Virginia. And now he's joining a Cal team that is losing most of their backcourt. Obviously, the big loss for the Golden Bears is Andrei Stojakovic, who's transferred to Illinois and was just a tremendous scorer for this Cal team last year. They also lose Jeremiah Wilkinson to the transfer portal. I expect Ames to have a huge role for this team offensively next year. I think he's going to be kind of the primary focal point offensively, at least in terms of facilitating and getting the team into their offensive sets. But I think he's going to score a lot too. So I wouldn't be, I'm not picking him to be like all ACC first team or anything like that. I don't think Cal's going to be competitive enough to have players that are necessarily in that conversation outside of, if they had another Stojakovic type season. And I don't think Ames will be that offensively or scoring wise, but I do think he's a talented player. And I think we're going to see him have a solid junior season, his first with the Golden Bears.
Yeah, and Andy, let's remember, 8 points, 9 points at Virginia is like 39 points elsewhere. To your point about their plotting tempo, and so big opportunity for Day Ames. One of the best Day, man. That's just such a cool name.
Fun name.
Absolutely love it. Interested to see how Cal does in year 2 in the ACC. Andy, for my choice, I have a North Carolina Tar Heel. Obviously, they have a crud ton of incoming transfers. As you said, there are multiple potential players to choose from this team. It was funny. before I say the pick, we both mentioned as we were prepping, we had trouble with the ACC because there wasn't really anybody obvious from Duke, right? Like neither of us really liked Caleb Foster as a choice for this. We both looked hard at Louisville and didn't find somebody we wanted to use. And so Henri Veesaar is somebody that makes a lot of sense for this to me. Let's remember that 2 off seasons ago, North Carolina had a lot of trouble landing a big to replace Armando Bacot. That didn't work out. And then this offseason, they immediately went to Arizona and got Henri Veesaar from Arizona. He had a big fat jump from 2.4 points his freshman year to 9.4 last year with a gap year in between. He missed 23-24 with an injury. But even last year, there just wasn't, I mentioned in the last segment, opportunity, and there just wasn't a ton of opportunity for Veesaar. He's only started like 5 games in his career. That was late last season. He started in place of Trey Townsend. A lot of his opportunity went up last year when Mo Krivas went down with that injury. I think he last played on like December 7th. But really started coming along. He had a career high 22 points in March against Arizona State, had 19 against Kansas, Andy, in beating the Jayhawks in the Big 12 tournament. And then in Arizona's season-ending loss to Duke in the Sweet 16, he had 13. And so contextually, like he was already coming in and going to have a big opportunity at Carolina. And then let's remember that Van Allen Lubin left and is not going to be his backup now. He went to NC State. And so, again, this is an opportunity moment where it's like, there really ain't much behind Henri Veesaar. And so he's going to gobble up all sorts of points and rebounds and blocks, and he'll eat as much as he wants to and as in shape as he is. Also thinking contextually about the Hubert Davis era at North Carolina, they've done their best when they have a stretch forward that can really play well. Think about Brady Manick in the year they went to the national championship game, or 2 seasons ago with Harrison Ingram. And so now for the first time in the Hubert Davis era, they've got a stretch 5. They've never had that under Hubert Davis. And so I think there's just a lot of potential for Henri Veesaar to do work. As we said in the teaser ahead of this segment, there's just a litany of big men success at North Carolina, and Henri Veesaar could be in line to be the next one of those. Andy, I think the big question here is, will he be able and ready to handle the massive workload that is ahead of him?
Yeah, I think that's the big question. Is Veesaar somebody who can play more than, the 20 minutes per game that he played last year at Arizona? And I think like you have to assume yes, or at least that he can play at that level and be more consistent and, increase the efficiency and have more of those performances like he had, when he had the 22 versus Arizona State, like you mentioned, or the 19 against Kansas in the Big 12 tournament. Like, I think he's capable of being that guy, but is it going to happen consistently? Is he going to be somebody who ends up being a little bit frustrating, where it's like, oh, some games he's, he plays 20 minutes, sure, but he gives you only 6 points because he misses 5 shots at the rim? Or is he going to be somebody who's a bit more consistent? I think that's the big question. I think you're right in identifying that the stretch 5 element is going to be really intriguing as well. Like, what does Hubert Davis do with somebody like this? And again, Veesaar's, the volume of outside shots for him isn't super high, but the efficiency is I think he's somebody who could be a weapon that you could use in that space. And so I'm interested to see what Davis and what Carolina does with him. But I think he kind of perfectly fits all of this because he's had some opportunities. He's flashed some glimpses. He's in a new system. He's in a system that's thrived with this kind of player in the past. Like, all of those kind of check the boxes of what you're looking for a breakout type candidate. And I would not be surprised to see Veesaar really pop in North Carolina's system. And honestly, it wouldn't just be him, but if Veesaar can have a great season, if Jaron Stevenson, who was the other player that I strongly considered for this spot, if he can have a good season, if somebody like Kyan Evans, who was a little over 10 points per game last year at Colorado State, if he can have a big season, I mean, we're talking about a group of junior transfers joining North Carolina who are not only all potential breakout candidates, but they're the kind of players that collectively could help cool Hubert Davis's seat down a little bit and potentially make him feel a little bit more comfortable that he's going to be sticking around in Chapel Hill for a little bit longer, because they need to have a big season here in order for that to be the case.
Andy, that's a great word. And I think Stevenson and Evans would both be in that honorable mention contention for us in the ACC. A couple others, Andy, that I think stick out to me. Sam Walters, who is now at SMU. Remember, he had that really tantalizing freshman year at Alabama, fell off a lot last year. I think going to SMU, where they, man, have a high scoring offensive system, like we saw that with Boopy last year. And so I'd really like to see that resurgence from Sam Walters. He's got great positional size, great shooting, and a lot there. Amani Hansberry is another potential breakout junior at Virginia Tech. And another one where I'm cheating the system a little bit with an honorable mention. True Washington had 11 points a game last year, but comes over to Miami, who is in desperate need of some help. And so we'll see what happens there.
I'll allow some cheating on a transfer in that situation. I think for an honorable mention, I think it's okay. True Washington's actually a great pick. I think he's kind of the less heralded transfer addition for Miami behind like Malik Reneau and the other transfers they have coming in. But Washington's a guy that I think could really make some noise for Jay Lucas and the Canes this season. But folks, it is time to move to the Big East. We're talking Deshaun Harris-Smith could break out at Georgetown, even if he is surrounded by some bigger name players for Ed Cooley's team. We're also going to talk about Isaac, who we've alluded to this multiple times. He cheated for his final pick in the Big East, but we're accepting it because it is a solid breakout pick. We're going to get to that coming up here in just a second. All right, folks, going to talk two more players here, junior breakout candidates, both in the Big East. As a reminder, we have talked SEC, ACC, and Big East for today's show, talking about junior breakout candidates. Later in the week, we will talk about the Big 10, the Big 12, and our mid-major picks for breakout candidates in the junior class. But for right now, we're going to go to the Big East, and we're going to go to Isaac's pick. Many of you are probably guessing who this might be or have a theory who this might be, as somebody who averaged a little over 10 points per game last year, but is still in line to have a potentially much bigger role heading into their junior year. Isaac, talk to us about who you got in the Big East.
Yeah, it's solo ball, right? And Andy was very gracious to say a little bit over 10. He had 14 points a game last year. But Andy, here's why I'm cheating on this one. I feel like solo ball was wildly overlooked, at least nationally. I feel like UConn and maybe Big East folks like appreciate and understand who solo ball is and what he's going to do. But I feel like in a lot of, and yet, yes, UConn has a lot of other talent coming in. I think it's going to be, I don't know if they'll be back to national championship capability. I think they'll be in the conversation, but they're going to be much improved from what they were last year, in my humble opinion. And I think a lot of that is because of solo ball. Last year, I think part of the reason he was overlooked is because there was all the hype for big-time freshman Liam McNeely, and understandably so. There was all the conversation about Alex Caravan coming back, and wow, I can't believe it, and he's going to be so great. You had Terrace Reed coming in and Samson Johnson, and can Samson step into the role of these big men before him that have left, Sonogo and Klingon and all that. Mm-hmm. And so, Indy, even that said, though, even going into last year, I remember a lot of conversations we had about Alex Caravan and being like, I don't know that he's the guy to be the guy for right. UConn. And, you know, there were questions about Mahaney, and I don't know if this is going to work at UConn. We assumed McNeely would play a massive role. But Andy, I don't think there's any more hiding in the weeds. I think this year is the year that everyone finally sees ball and he takes an even bigger jump, right? Like last year, he and Caravan and McNeely were all there at 14 points a game together. And I mean, it's crazy to look at his jump from his freshman to his sophomore year. Looking back at his game log, his freshman year, Andy had 3 games where he scored in double digits. Last year had just 3 games where he didn't score in double digits. So the consistency is there. I feel like he's got like good positional. He's a 6'4" guard. Mm-hmm. He's got some of that Hurley mentality in him, which always goes well. This dude last year led the Big East in 3-point field goal percentage at 41.4% on really good volume, Andy. 6.8 attempts per game. 68 attempt, man. He was just, we got Grinnell College going on in scores, Andy. It's crazy. But I just think it's going to be a massive year for solo ball. And so even though he doesn't fit our 10-point threshold, I think the sky's the limit this year. And man, it's going to be a great year.
I'm really interested to see what UConn does with the backcourt that's going to include Ball as well as Silas Demery transferring over from Georgia and Malachi Smith transferring in from Dayton. Like they got They got a seemingly large amount of talent in that backcourt, some bigger guards, some physical guards who can do a lot of different things. Obviously, they're having to replace Hassan Diarra, who's out the door. They're having to replace Mahaney, who transferred, but also, Jalen Stewart, somebody who could step into a bigger role. He's a bit more of a wing than a guard, but it's a good problem for Danny Hurley's team to have. And I think unquestionably Solo Ball is going to be not only a part of that mix, but the guy, I think, in terms of having a huge role in this offense. Him and Caravan are going to kind of carry the load. I think Demery is obviously going to have a big role as well, probably pushing Malachi Smith to more of that bench role for this team. But yeah, Solo Ball is outstanding. He's tremendous. I think he's going to be the face, or at least part of Hurley's always going to be the face of UConn. I think that's just the reality of the situation at this point. But I think that Solo Ball is going to kind of be that player who has been a little bit, like you said, not really in the spotlight. And I think that's going to change this upcoming season. I think that's a great pick. I went with somebody very different. Somebody who averaged 12 points less per game than Solo Ball last year. That would be Deshaun Harris-Smith. Deshaun Harris-Smith played his first 2 seasons at Maryland. He only averaged 2.5 points per game last year. So one of the least productive players that we have as our breakout candidate. It is worth acknowledging that Harris-Smith did average over 7 points per game as a freshman. So it's not like he hasn't shown some proclivity to be a decent enough score, at least in the Big Ten. Now he's coming over to the Big East, joining Ed Cooley's team at Georgetown, and not the most heralded transfer addition for the Hoyas, not even the most heralded kind of backcourt wing addition for them. They're bringing in Langston Love, sharpshooter coming over from Baylor. They're also bringing in KJ Lewis, who was a candidate for this list, although he was slightly over 10 points per game at Arizona last year. I wanted to go with Harris-Smith while giving myself an opportunity to talk about KJ Lewis a little bit as well, because I think those 2 guys and Langston Love, those 3 guys all coming in, filling different roles for this Ed Cooley team. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of how they find the roles for each of these players. But Harris-Smith's a guy who, again, 7 points per game as a true freshman in the Big Ten at Maryland. He's a decent rebounder for his position. He's got good positional size. He's a different passer. Last year, his efficiency was really down. I mean, he for his career, he's barely over 20% from 3. So our boy is not an outside shooter. So I think that's something where, do you find him a role where, because you have guys like Lewis and Love who are better at spacing the floor, you have Harris-Smith more in a role where he's just driving to the basket and trying to get points that way? And I think there's an opportunity for him to be a much bigger piece of this Georgetown club than he was at Maryland last year. I think ultimately a lot of this can be boiled down to simply he needed a change of scenery. I think anybody who drops 5 points per game from their freshman year to their sophomore year probably is going to want to go somewhere else. I think that's pretty reasonable. Maryland was obviously so dominated by their Crab 5, their starting lineup last year, that it kind of pushed anybody who was on that bench into a much smaller role. And I think Harris-Smith's somebody who's going to thrive in Cooley's system at Georgetown.
Yeah, Andy, it's going to be really interesting to see, can they get it going? Like Harris-Smith aside, can Cooley get this going at Georgetown? It's one of those programs that we always say it's college basketball is better when Georgetown is good, right? And want to see that happen. And so I think that Deshaun, along with Langston Love, please stay healthy, Langston Love, please stay healthy. And KJ Lewis should be great. Andy, all that said, all I can think about is the fact that you just used the word proclivity, and it made my day. And so I'm so proud of you right now for getting that worked into the show. Andy, let's get a couple honorable mentions in here. Couple names. I really thought hard about using Butler's Finley Bizjack as my choice. Because his name is incredible. But also he was slightly over that 10-point threshold, but I blew past that with Solo Ball, but could really help Butler. Layden Blocker is somebody that's really intriguing to me as well, Andy. His freshman year had just under 4 points a game at Arkansas, transferred to DePaul last year where he was almost at 10 points a game. But man, if DePaul can keep moving forward, I think there's a chance for Blocker to be really good there. Another is Tyler Perkins at Villanova, who has averaged double digits in his career at Penn 2 years ago, but didn't do that at Villanova last year because I don't think anybody could score last year at Villanova because somebody was eating up all them points, Andy, and he's out the door. And so we'll see there. And one other is a little homie, a little speedster, Sean Jones at Marquette missed all of last year. And this dude, what is it, 5'10", but can fly around the court. Obviously, Marquette is a team that loses, talking about losing a big time scorer, Cam Jones out the door. And so they're going to need scoring. I remember a couple of years ago when, the Jones boys were kicking it and going really well together. And so really interested to see him get back on the floor, see what he can do for Shaka's team.
I actually got one more I want to toss in there, and it's a perfect segue because it's also somebody on Shaka's team, and for a lot of the same reasons. It's Zayd Lowery. Zayd Lowery stepping into his junior year after 2 seasons as a bit player. He played 31 games in each of his first 2 seasons at Marquette, but only played combined 12 and a half minutes per game. Last year, he averaged just 4 points, 3 rebounds, but his efficiency was incredible last year for Marquette. He was he jumped from being 35% on 2-pointers as a freshman to 58.7% specifically as a sophomore. His 3-point percentage went from 31 to 37.5. So we're talking about a guy who went from 9 minutes a game to 16 minutes per game, who was more efficient in every possible way, and is now stepping into a junior year where Marquette's going to need more scoring after losing Cam Jones, like you mentioned. And nobody does this. I mean, nobody except maybe Matt Painter does it better than Shaka Smart at Marquette in terms of developing talent and keeping guys through the system. A guy who's played 12 minutes per game in his first 2 years, who was a 4-star recruit. Those guys often transfer, and Lowery did not, and he's still here, and now he's in line for a bigger role. I would not be surprised to see him be somebody who kind of steps into a much bigger role for Marquette as a junior this upcoming season.
At some point, Andy, I know this is a whole other conversation, 5 years down the road or something, somebody's going to need to look back and do a study on how Shaka Smart in this era has been able to maintain a program when everyone else is having to rebuild year to year. How is it that he's doing such a good job of maintaining, retaining talent and developing when nobody else can, seemingly? Man, it's so cool to see. And I just like the old traditionalist in me, the old man yelling at the sun, loves what's happening at Marquette. So way to go, Shaka Smart. All right, guys, that is volume 1 of our junior breakouts. Again, we did SEC, ACC, and Big East. This is Tuesday's show. Couple of days, Andy will have the next couple shows along with Leaf on one of them. But then Friday, we're going to do volume 2 of this conversation. So we'll give you our junior breakout candidates for the Big 10, the Big 12, and then out of the other 26 conferences, Andy, because math tells me that right now we've still only got 31 and we're talking about 5 of them. It's still, the 31-32 is messing me up with the Pac-12 out the door. We got to get it back one more year and that'll be good. So thanks so much for tuning in, folks. Please don't miss out on the back half of this on Friday, where we'll give you our other candidates. Oh man, it's going to be a great conversation. If you haven't subscribed to Locked On College Basketball all over the place, man, now's the time to do it so you don't miss a second. If you haven't joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord that Andy referenced earlier in the show, we'd love to see you in there. We're talking about this stuff all the time. That link's in the show notes, free to join. As always, apologies to the Lawyer family. Cheers to the McBruins. Shouts to the Wild Popes. I got that all out of order today, Andy. We'll talk to you again tomorrow, but until then, peace.